Listen close, friend, and let me tell you a tale about a strong-hearted widow and her two brave boys cast into a pit of despair by the very kin who should have sheltered them, out on the wild frontier. No tears last long in the dust and heat, for hardship either breaks you or sets your spirit ablaze. In this land of rattlesnakes and black-hatted cowboys, betrayal runs thick, and it's every soul for themselves. But sometimes honor and kindness blaze bright enough to light the darkness, even on the most unforgiving of trails. This is the story you won't soon forget. Clara Bennett never imagined her life would come to this. A dusty road in the middle of nowhere. Her two young boys trailing behind her, the three of them clinging to one another for warmth against the biting wind. Only a few weeks ago, Clara wore a bright smile, believing in the promise of love and security after the sudden death of her husband, Thomas. But now her eyes held nothing but a quiet, simmering pain. Thomas Bennett had been a rancher of moderate means. He wasn't wealthy, but he provided for Clara and their two sons, James and William, with fierce dedication. When tragedy struck, Thomas, killed by an unexpected riding accident, while driving cattle across the plains, the shock alone nearly shattered Clara's world. She did not yet know that her greatest heartache was still to come. Thomas's brother, Everett. Bennett and his wife, Mildred, had insisted on taking in Clara and the boys. They insisted that it was the honorable thing to do, and they promised to help them keep Thomas's ranch afloat. Clara, in her grief, believed them wholeheartedly. After all, she had nowhere else to turn, and Everett and Mildred were kin family helps. Family, so she had always been taught. But soon enough, the illusions began to crumble. In the weeks following Thomas's funeral, Clara overheard hushed conversations between Everett and Mildred in the parlor. At first, their words were quiet, guarded. Then the tension grew, and they became more careless. One night, Clara listened as Everett angrily hissed about how he never wanted to burden himself with Thomas's widow and her brood. He claimed that Thomas had left more debts than assets, that the ranch was a failing piece of land, and that it would cost Everett a fortune to keep them all afloat. Clara realized that what she had taken for kindness was little more than a veneer. It frightened her. Without warning, the ultimatum came. Everett demanded Clara sign over her legal share of the ranch. He insisted that she and her children could remain under his roof only if she relinquished ownership. They would be at his mercy, effectively powerless. For a moment, Clara almost agreed anything to ensure her boys had a bed. But then she remembered her late husband's voice, the way he fought tooth and nail for them. Thomas had always said, "Your name is on that deed as much as mine. Don't let anyone take it away from you, Claire." Clara refused. Maybe it was her last act of defiance, or maybe it was a desperate attempt to honor her husband's wishes. She simply stood her ground, politely but firmly told Everett that she would never sign away the ranch that her boys should one day inherit. And that was when Everett made his next move. He demanded she leave by sunrise the next morning. She had overstayed her welcome. He said he would not feed or clothe any freeloaders. If she wanted the ranch, she could go live on it herself. He was done. Mildred didn't utter a single protest. In fact, she seemed relieved that the burden was about to be lifted. Clara begged just one more night. She implored so she could figure out what to do next. Her pleas fell on stone hearts. So at dawn, with only a small satchel of belongings and nothing else but the two frightened boys at her side, Clara left that house. She turned only once to see if anyone would bid them farewell. She saw Everett glaring from the porch, arms crossed the wind, rustling his greasy hair. Mildred remained inside, not even a single tear shed. "Come on, Mama," James asked, his 11-year-old voice trembling. "Where do we go?" Clara had no answer. She simply squeezed his hand and led them onward, the horizon too far to fathom. The Bennett Ranch lay on the outskirts of the dusty trails leading toward Dodge City, Kansas, a decent ride from the nearest settlement. Though once humming with activity under Thomas's steady supervision, the ranch had suffered from neglect during the weeks after his death. Clara and the boys arrived to find the stable nearly empty, the fences sagging, the well in need of repairs. Tumbleweeds littered the yard. Her heart sank at the sight of the place Thomas had loved so dearly, but despair was quickly joined by determination. She was a Bennett now by name, and she had a duty to keep that ranch alive for her sons. The first night they had nothing but the dusty floor of the dilapidated ranch house to lay their heads upon. The roof leaked, the windows rattled in the wind. Clara recalled how once, not so long ago, the hearth had been warm, the scent of fresh stew wafting in the air as Thomas came in from a hard day's work. She closed her eyes, trying to relive a memory that felt so recent, yet so impossibly far away. That night she made a pact with herself. She would do whatever it took to give James and William a chance. She would find work, mend fences, salvage the ranch. She would do it alone if she had to, because if she gave up, then Everett would take everything from them, and she couldn't bear the thought of letting him win, not after throwing her and her children out like cattle gone lame. Sleep came in, fits her mind, racing with the magnitude of the challenge ahead. She needed help, but had little idea where to find it. She had only a few dollars left in the coin purse she managed to keep. It might buy them a couple weeks' worth of food, at best. After that, survival was up in the air. Within days, Clara realized the ranch was beyond her ability to salvage alone. She needed supplies, building materials, feed for what few animals remained, a pair of mules, a chicken or two, and an old milking cow on her last good years. But traveling into town was risky, as she feared running into Everett, or worse, discovering that her name carried no weight when it came to credit. Still, she had no choice. Leaving James, the older boy, in charge of tending to William and the animals, Clara rode a borrowed mule toward Dodge City. Dodge City was known to be wild, full of prospectors, gamblers, saloons, and lawmen who tried their best to keep the peace. Clara didn't have the money for a hotel, so her plan was simple. Acquire the most basic supplies, see if any merciful soul would extend a line of credit, and go from there. But as she arrived, the cacophony of hooves, wagons, and the boisterous voices of saloon patrons overwhelmed her senses. She could see in the men's eyes a mixture of curiosity, pity, and sometimes cruelty, the reflection of her precarious status. Standing outside a mercantile named Wirtz & Co., Clara clutched her small purse. She remembered that Thomas had done business here occasionally, though she was uncertain how they'd receive her. The proprietor, a balding man in his early 60s named Amos Wirtz, recognized the Bennett name. At first he seemed concerned, wanting to know how Thomas's widow was faring, but upon learning that her resources were nearly nil, the warmth faded from his eyes. He carried a worn ledger and explained the outstanding balances that had accumulated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett," he said with genuine regret, "but I can't extend any more credit until your late husband's debts are cleared." Defeated, Clara stepped out into the street, uncertain where to go next. Anxiety gnawed at her. If she couldn't buy feed or seeds, how could she keep the ranch alive? She was on the verge of tears when a gentle voice behind her asked, "Mom, are you in need of some assistance?" Turning around, she found herself facing a lean cowboy, perhaps in his early 30s, with a wide-brimmed hat that had clearly seen better days. His cheeks were sun-kissed from many hours under the harsh western sun, and dusty boots suggested a life spent mostly on the range. She tried to muster a polite smile. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just a bit lost is all." He introduced himself as Hank Dawson. "I see you got that Bennett brand on your mule," he said quietly. "Are you from the Bennett Ranch near the Cedar Creek Trail?" She swallowed hard. "It's my ranch now. My name is Clara Bennett. I lost my husband a few weeks ago." The cowboy looked at her with genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Thomas was a good man. Didn't know him well, but we rode together once, driving cattle south. I'm right sorry for your loss." Those words, spoken gently, nearly undid her. She blinked back, tears nodding. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm trying to keep the ranch afloat for my boys. But I can't get supplies on credit and, well, we're nearly out of food." Hank removed his hat respectfully. "I ain't got much myself, ma'am, but if you'll allow me, I'd be happy to buy you a meal." "Maybe talk about a plan." Clara hesitated. Ever since Everett's betrayal, she had grown wary of help. She was used to hearing polite offers twisted into hidden agendas. Yet Hank Dawson's gaze radiated such earnest kindness. Besides, desperation was a relentless persuader. She accepted. "That's mighty kind of you. Thank you." The diner sat on the corner of a bustling street with a small wooden sign squeaking in the breeze. Inside, the smell of stew and fresh cornbread caressed Clara's senses. She settled into a booth, feeling the curious glances from a few onlookers. Hank asked for 2 bowls of stew bread and coffee. The waitress, a friendly older woman, gave Clara a knowing wink, as if to say, "You'll be all right, dear." Over the meal, Hank listened patiently as Clara recounted what had happened: her husband's death, Everett's ultimatum, and being cast out to the neglected ranch. She briefly touched on her abject poverty. Now how she had just enough coin to last maybe 2 more weeks if she was careful. When she finished, Hank said softly, "I ain't exactly flush with cash myself, ma'am, but I might have a way to help the ranch." "I've been working on is folding up, boss. Died no heirs. I'm out of a job, but I got some skill. If you're willing to take on a hand who works for a modest wage, and if you can't pay me for a while, I'll work for your table scraps. If that's how it's gotta be, I'll help you get your ranch back on its feet." Clara was astonished. The idea of a stranger offering to help with no immediate expectation of pay seemed almost too generous. But in the West, sometimes, folks looked after each other when all else failed. She studied Hank's face, searching for signs of an ulterior motive. She saw only a sincere resolve. "I can't promise much more than a roof over your head and some meals," she said truthfully. "That's enough for me," he said. "Better than sleeping under the stars all winter or drifting into trouble in a place like Dodge." "Let me help you. I can mend fences." "Fix that well." Pump heard from Thomas that the gears stick sometimes, and teach your boys a thing or two about ranch work. And maybe we can show that no good Everett. You don't need his charity. Clara's heart pounded. It felt like a lifeline, albeit a fragile one. Still, in the face of desperation, a single lifeline could be everything. "Yes," she said, simply, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, please, come out to the ranch in the morning. I'll make sure you're as comfortable as we can manage." That day, Hank used his own limited funds to buy a small supply of groceries, a sack of flour, beans, and a little coffee, and insisted on carrying the goods back to the ranch. They rode side by side down the dusty trail as the sun began to set, casting long crimson shadows across the frontier. James and William were waiting anxiously in the yard, their faces lit up at the sight of their mother returning, with not only a pack of supplies, but also a new face. Hank dismounted, tipping his hat to them, Clara did quick introductions. "Boys, this is Hank Dawson. He's agreed to help us fix up the ranch." James, the older one, looked Hank up and down. "You're a cowboy, right?" he asked, eyes wide, with a boyish fascination. "I mean a real one." Hank grinned. "I reckon you could say that. Worked ranches all across these plains. Been a wrangler since I was just a little older than you, William." Only 8 clung to Clara's skirt, but peeked out with a shy smile Clara could see in their eyes, a spark of hope they hadn't had since losing their father. It renewed her own sense of possibility. Maybe they could make it through this harrowing time together. That night, she and the boys prepared Hank a spot in the small bunkhouse out back. The roof needed patching, but the walls still stood firm. When the lantern light flickered in the darkness, Clara offered him one more thanks. He simply nodded and said good night, leaving her with a sense that the turning of fate might have just begun. For the next week, Hank and the boys worked from dawn until dusk. Together they repaired the stable doors, hammered nails into sagging fences, and cleared out debris. They even managed to get the old pump working again, providing fresh water for what remained of the livestock. Clara did her part, cooking simple meals from the limited provisions and lending a hand where she could. She walked the perimeter of the ranch with William, picking up stray bits of broken equipment that could be salvaged, yet progress was slow and new. Challenges emerged daily. A spring storm struck, battering the roof and causing leaks that soaked the meager bedding they had. Hank climbed onto the roof in the downpour, risking life and limb to throw a tarp over the worst holes. By the time he came down, shivering and drenched, James and William looked at him like he was a hero from one of their dime novel stories. Truth be told, Hank's unwavering resolve was beginning to lift Clara's spirits as well. Meanwhile, though supplies dwindled, there was only so much Hank's small stash of savings could cover. Clara worried about how they'd purchase seeds to plant, how they'd feed any cattle if they managed to buy some or get them on loan. She was haunted by Everett's demand that she sign over the ranch. His words echoed in her mind every time she ran her hand along the chipped beams of the home. She knew he was counting on her to fail to come crawling back or to sell the deed in defeat. The air was crisp and dry as Clara saddled up one of the mules and rode out alone toward Cedar Creek. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the prairie with hues of amber and rust. She had been restless all morning. Sleep had come in short, scattered bursts the night before. Her thoughts were heavy with worry, supplies were dwindling again, and she didn't want to rely on Hank's generosity forever. Still, it was spring now, and Cedar Creek was running strong. Clara hoped to collect some wild mint and lavender to soothe the boys' coughs, and maybe trade a few bundles in Dodge for other needed goods. The ride was familiar, but lonely. The mule plodded along slowly, and Clara found her mind drifting. She thought about Thomas, how he used to hum as they rode together, his hand brushing hers on the reins. That memory brought both a soft smile and a dull ache in her chest. She missed him every hour of every day, but she had learned that missing someone didn't stop the world from turning. She had to keep moving forward, if not for herself, then for James and William. When she arrived at the creek, she dismounted and tied the mule to a low-hanging branch. Kneeling near the water's edge, she let the coolness of the stream soothe her hands before she began foraging for herbs. Wild mint grew in lush patches along the bank, and she began cutting it with a small pocket knife, slipping each stem into her gathering basket. The scent was calming, and for a brief moment, Clara allowed herself to believe they might actually make it, that maybe the worst was behind them. Then she heard it. The sound of hooves. Her entire body tensed. She ducked low behind a small cluster of brush, her heart thudding in her ears. Travelers were common along this trail, but that didn't mean they were friendly. Out here alone with no shotgun and no one to call for help. She was vulnerable. The voices reached her before the riders came into view. "Looks like someone beat us to the creek." A male voice sneered. Clara slowly rose to her feet, eyes narrowing as 3 riders came into focus, and her blood turned to ice. Everett Bennett. He sat tall in the saddle reins, loose in one hand, that same smug grin on his face that she remembered from the day he threw her and the boys out like stray dogs. Flanking him were 2 of his ranch hands, thick-shouldered men with squinty eyes and hard-set jaws. They looked like they enjoyed being told to break things or people. "Well," Clara Everett said, dismounting with a practiced swagger. "Ain't this a surprise?" Clara straightened her shoulders and said, nothing, silently, calculating the distance to her mule and wondering if she could mount and ride before they blocked her. And Everett didn't wait for an invitation. He took a step closer, brushing dust off his vest. "I figured you'd come crawling back by now. That old ranch of yours must be hanging on by a thread. No water, no livestock, no income. But here you are, picking weeds by the creek." "They're herbs," Clara said coolly, refusing to let him rile her. "And the ranch is none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," Everett replied, circling her slowly. "You're sitting on land that's worth something, even if you're too stubborn to admit it. You think your little cowboy friend and a few chickens are going to save that place. You'll run out of luck soon enough. Why prolong the suffering?" Clara's fists clenched around the basket. "We're managing just fine." Everett laughed, the sound as hollow as an old well-managing right. "I suppose that's what you call sleeping in a shack and living on scraps." He leaned in his voice, dropping, "I'll make you an offer. Come back to my place. Bring the boys. I'll put you all up in the guest house, and in return you sign over the deed. No more worry. No more scraping by. You get food, warmth, safety. It's a generous offer. Clara." She met his gaze without flinching. "Generous, after what you did to us. After throwing us out into the cold, like cattle gone lame, I'd rather starve in that shack than ever live under your roof again." His face twisted just for a second into a flash of irritation. Then he recovered, chuckling as if amused by a child's tantrum. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't offer. You'll come around eventually. Everyone has a breaking point." "Maybe," Clara said, stepping past him toward her mule. "But you'll break before I do." Everett's smile faltered. "You always were a mouthy one," he muttered. She turned her back to him without fear and began untying the reins. Behind her the silence stretched. Then one of the ranch hands, a greasy-haired man with a scar running down his cheek, spat in the dirt. "You want we should teach her some respect." "Boss." Clara froze. Everett waved him off, but his voice held a dangerous edge. "Not today. She's not worth the trouble." Yet, as they turned to leave, Everett paused and looked over his shoulder. "Don't be too proud to crawl. Clara Pride won't feed your boys." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. When the men rode away, Clara's knees finally buckled, and she sank into the grass, breath catching in her throat. Anger pulsed through her like fire anger at Everett, at the world, at the cruel twist of fate that had left her fighting for survival, with no one to rely on but herself. And now Hank. She sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of crimson. Then she rose, slowly dusted off her skirt, and gathered the herbs that had spilled from her basket during the confrontation. Her hands were shaking, but her spine was straight. Everett had come to intimidate her. But all he had done was remind her of what was at stake and what she was willing to fight for. As she rode back toward the ranch, Clara felt the stirrings of something deeper than anger resolve. She would not lose this land. Not to him. Not to anyone. Over the next weeks, Hank managed to catch and tame one of the wild mustangs. He worked tirelessly, rising before dawn to gain the horse's trust. With no small amount of patience, he eventually succeeded in saddling the stallion. If I break this horse right, I can sell him for a decent price. In Dodge, Hank said, wiping sweat from his brow, "That'll buy us some seed and maybe a little extra feed for winter." Encouraged, Clara began to see a future where the ranch might actually sustain them. She even started drafting letters to old acquaintances of Thomas, hoping they might be willing to extend a small loan or help in some capacity. One day, a wagon pulled up, surprising them all. The driver was an older woman with a strong build and silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Frances Miller. "I heard you were struggling with your ranch," she said. "My late husband, God rest his soul, once rode with Thomas. I figure maybe I can lend a hand. Heard from the folks in town that Everett's made your life hell." Clara, stunned by the kindness, invited Mrs. Miller to sit and talk. Mrs. Miller explained she had some savings tucked away. She wasn't wealthy, but she had enough to invest in a small stake in the ranch's harvest. If Clara and Hank could produce a successful crop, Tessas, Miller would see a fair share of the profits in return for her upfront loan. In an instant, Clara's eyes brimmed with gratitude. This was exactly the kind of break they needed. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling. "You have no idea what this means to us." Mrs. Miller stayed for supper, discussing farmland strategies and which crops might best suit the region's climate. Corn beans, maybe some hardy root vegetables. With the promise of her modest loan, the ranch was one step closer to viability. It felt almost miraculous. Spring came with swirling winds and unpredictable storms. Clara and Hank worked long hours in the field, sowing seeds while the boys helped plant beans and corn around the property. The newly purchased feed kept the old cow healthy enough for milking. With the money from Mrs. Miller's loan, they purchased more supplies from Wirtz & Co. in Dodge. Amos Wirtz, seeing the coin in hand, was all too happy to provide them the goods needed. He even offered a small discount once he understood that a reliable older woman like Mrs. Miller was backing them. Clara felt the stirring of something like confidence. But the West could be as unforgiving as it was magnificent. One afternoon, a black thunderhead crawled across the plains, devouring the sun with ominous speed. Clara, Hank, and the boys rushed to bring the tools inside and shelter the animals. The wind picked up, howling like a banshee. Rain fell in sheets. The newly planted fields were at risk of flooding. Hank and James ran out with shovels, attempting to dig channels to divert water away from the crops. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rattled the windows. Clara stood on the porch, praying for her family's safety. Suddenly, a terrifying shriek rose above the wind. She saw James tumble in the mud, nearly carried away by a flash flood that had surged down a drainage ditch. Hank lunged, grabbing the boy by the collar. Together they managed to scramble to higher ground. Though battered and soaked, they all survived the storm. But in the morning, the land bore deep scars. The newly planted fields were partially washed out. The soil eroded in places. Some seeds were likely lost, scattered or drowned. Hank assessed the damage. "We can salvage maybe half of it," he said grimly. But half is better than nothing. Despair threatened to creep in again. Yet Clara refused to yield. "Then let's salvage half, and see if we can replant the rest. We have enough seed left, don't we?" Hank nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Yes, Mum, we do." So they replanted, and they waited, hoping nature would be kinder in the months ahead. Even as the ranch labored to find its footing, Everett Bennett's shadow loomed. He had men in Dodge City who kept him informed about Clara's business, learning that she had a partner in Mrs. Miller and that some progress was being made on the ranch. Everett seethed with resentment. He had fully expected Clara to fail to come crawling back, deed in hand. Instead, she was standing her ground. Rumor had it, she had a cowboy working for her too, a man by the name of Hank Dawson. In small frontier towns, gossip traveled fast. One evening, Everett hatched a plan that was as cruel as it was cunning. He met with a local gambler named Floyd Red Gilson, a man known for questionable ethics. Everett whispered that he needed Red to sabotage the Bennett ranch, maybe slash some fences, spook the animals, or steal supplies. "Anything to bring Clara to her knees, I'll pay you well," Everett said, sliding a small pouch of gold coins across the table in a darkened corner of a Dodge City saloon. Red took the gold with a wicked grin, for dirty deeds were his specialty. He planned to strike the ranch when everyone was asleep, ensuring the maximum amount of damage before riding off into the night. Clara was a light sleeper these days, her ears attuned to every creak of the floorboards, every gust rattling the window. So when Red Gilson and 2 accomplices crept onto the property, she stirred awake at the sound of muffled hooves. She grabbed her old shotgun, a relic Thomas had left behind, and tiptoed to the window. The moon lit 3 silhouettes, skulking near the barn. Instantly, her heart slammed into her ribcage. She woke Hank, who rose swiftly, pulling on his boots. "Stay here," he whispered. "Keep the boys safe. I'll check it out." While Clara guarded the front door with the shotgun, Hank crept around to the side of the barn, moving in near silence. He spotted the intruders, their figures partially illuminated by a lantern one held. They were cutting the ropes that secured the livestock, rummaging through feed sacks and scattering them on the ground. One tried to set a small flame to a bale of hay near the barn. Hank realized they intended to burn it all. "Hey!" he shouted, charging forward. The intruders whirled around Red Gilson. A wiry man with a face like a hungry coyote smiled cruelly. "You must be Dawson," he sneered. "Heard about you before Hank could respond." Red drew his revolver. The muzzle flashed in the moonlight, and Hank dove behind a stack of lumber. The shot splintered wood near his head. Hank returned fire with his own sidearm, the bullets cracking through the night. Clara, hearing the chaos, rushed outside, ignoring her own terror. She fired the shotgun into the air, hoping to startle the attackers. The barnyard erupted in gunfire and shouts. In the commotion, James and William peered from the house window, both terrified. "Stay down!" Clara hollered at them on the floor. Suddenly, one of Red's men struck a match and flung it onto the scattered feed, soaked in oil. Flames licked upward, turning the barn into a flickering inferno of shadows. Hank realized the danger and dashed toward the barn to drive out the animals. Bullets whizzed past him like angry hornets. One grazed his left arm, but he pressed on, flinging open stalls and shooing terrified horses outside. Clara's heart pounded. She fired again, forcing one intruder to dive behind a trough. The shotgun clattered empty. Red, noticing she was out of ammunition, raised his revolver with a triumphant smirk. But just then, James hurled a bucket of water from the porch, catching the intruder off guard. Though the water did no real harm, it startled him just enough. Hank emerged from the smoke, tackling Red to the ground, the 2 men rolling in the dirt. The other 2 intruders, seeing Red pinned, decided the sabotage had gone far enough. They fled to their horses, spurring away into the night. Meanwhile, Red struggled under Hank's grip, kicking wildly. Hank managed to knock the revolver from Red's hand and press him into the mud. "Who sent you?" Hank demanded, breath ragged. Red coughed, spat blood. "You'll never prove it," he hissed. The barn's flames roared behind them. Clara rushed to help, but the heat drove her back. Hank quickly realized they had to contain the fire or lose everything. He slugged Red across the jaw, knocking him out cold, then jumped up to help Clara and the boys form a bucket line from the water trough. They battled the flames with relentless urgency, sweat and smoke stinging their eyes. Sparks shot upward into the night sky. By some miracle, they contained the fire to just the corner of the barn before it collapsed in a shower of embers. The rest of the ranch structures were saved. When dawn broke, Red Gilson was lying bound near the partially charred barn, nursing a swollen lip. The ranch yard was a mess of burnt timber and waterlogged debris. However, the essential feed and animals were mostly spared. By the grace of raw determination, the ranch had survived. Clara, Hank, and the boys hauled Red into Dodge City that morning, turning him over to the town marshal, a no-nonsense lawman named Marion Broderick. Upon searching Red, the marshal discovered a small slip of paper bearing the scrawled initials E.B., along with a sum of money to be collected. "That stands for Everett Bennett, doesn't it?" the marshal asked, narrowing his eyes. Red remained silent. But the evidence was enough for Marshal Broderick to suspect foul play. He locked Red up and sent a deputy to fetch Everett. Everett arrived at the jailhouse with an air of forced indignation, claiming he had no idea why he'd been summoned. But when confronted with Red's testimony under threat of a longer prison sentence, Red had squealed. Everett's face turned white. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Everett tried to bribe the marshal, which only made the situation worse. He was promptly arrested for conspiracy to commit arson and assault. Clara, standing by, watched Everett's face contort with rage as he was led to a cell. His life of manipulative scheming had finally caught up with him, and the sweet sting of justice hung in the air. For a moment their eyes met through the iron bars. She saw fear in his. For the first time, no longer was he the powerful figure capable of crushing her spirit. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I have friends. Connections." Clara merely shook her head, leaving him in the cell. She had spent too many tears on this man's cruelty. No more with Everett behind bars. The atmosphere shifted. Folks in Dodge City who had once been reluctant to help now stepped forward, offering to donate spare lumber or extra tools to rebuild the damaged barn. Mrs. Miller, hearing of the sabotage, returned with additional supplies from her own farm. Amos Wirtz, realizing that Clara was indeed making good on her efforts, offered a fresh line of credit at a fair interest rate. Even the local blacksmith volunteered to fix broken tools for free. Hank's injured arm healed slowly, but he refused to rest, continuing to work around the ranch. James, emboldened by the chaos of that night, asked Hank to teach him how to properly handle a firearm so he could protect the family if trouble ever came again. Hank obliged, instructing him in safety and marksmanship. Over the months that followed, the seeds sprouted. The fields, though partially damaged by the storm, began to show signs of life, green shoots pushing up through the soil, a symbol of resilience. Every day brought new tasks, new challenges, but also new reasons to hope. The smaller barn that had burned was rebuilt this time, sturdier with the help of new friends. Clara felt an overwhelming gratitude. The West was tough, but it wasn't without its share of good people willing to stand with those who'd been wronged. As summer deepened, Everett's day in court arrived. The makeshift courtroom above the marshal's office was packed with onlookers. Everett's lawyer tried every trick to paint Clara and Hank as liars or opportunists, But the evidence was clear. Red Gilson testified, though grudgingly, that Everett had paid him to sabotage the ranch. The judge, a stern-faced man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, listened carefully. After a brief deliberation, the verdict was pronounced. Everett Bennett was found guilty of conspiracy and attempted arson. He was sentenced to several years in state prison, effectively removing him as a threat to Clara and her family. A hush fell over the room when the judge addressed Clara, Miss Bennett. You have suffered at the hands of your in-laws in a disgraceful manner. This court recognizes your right to pursue restitution for damages. However, given Mr. Bennett's future incarceration, such compensation may be limited. Clara simply nodded. She didn't need blood money. Knowing Everett could no longer meddle in their lives was payment enough. She left the courtroom feeling lighter than she had in months. When autumn finally arrived, the Bennett ranch glimmered with promise. The corn stood tall, beans clung in ripe clusters, and a small orchard of fruit trees, once planted by Thomas, bore enough apples for canning. Though the ranch was still modest, the foundation of something lasting and good was in place. Hank sold the tamed Mustang for a respectable sum to a traveling buyer who admired the horse's strength and temperament. With that money, they purchased a few more head of cattle and pigs. Clara made sure to pay Hank a fair wage, no longer just table scraps. He tried to refuse at first, but she insisted it was time he received what he deserved. And in the midst of all this work and rebuilding, a gentle understanding grew between Clara and Hank. After all their shared struggles, there was a closeness that went beyond simple friendship. Late at night, when the boys slept, Clara and Hank would sit on the porch, sipping coffee, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. One evening, as the stars blinked over the vast prairie sky, Clara found her hand resting atop Hank's, a tender moment of connection. She thought of Thomas, how her love for him would always be a cherished memory, but she also felt the stirrings of a new bond, a quiet respect and affection for the man who had stood beside her through the darkest trials. Word reached Dodge City that Mildred Everett's wife had lost most of her social standing after the scandal. Everett's funds were tied up in legal battles and fines. Mildred, who had been so cold to Clara, discovered that many of the friends she'd once relied upon turned their backs on her. With no real income and no property in her name, she was forced to sell off family heirlooms to pay debts. It was rumored she wrote a letter to Clara, begging for help, claiming they were both widows in a harsh land. Clara read the letter only once. Her hands shook with the memories of being cast out, homeless with two hungry boys, while Mildred turned a blind eye. Yet Clara's heart remained kind. She might have considered some gesture of charity, if not for the cruelty inflicted upon her and her children. In the end, she decided the best course was to let the letter go unanswered. Mildred would have to find her own path, just as Clara had. Meanwhile, Everett languished in prison, no longer the proud rancher who believed the world was his to control. The same rumor peddlers who once circulated malicious gossip about Clara now spoke of Everett's disgrace, adding to the sense that justice had indeed been served. As winter approached, the Bennett ranch bustled with activity, mending fences for the cold, storing feed and preserving what they could. The small harvest had provided enough to repay Mrs. Miller's loan, with a modest profit left over. Clara made sure Mrs. Miller got not only her money back, but also some extra produce and preserves as a token of gratitude. Hank and the boys installed a new stove in the house, making the winter nights far more bearable. The place felt like a home again, filled with the aroma of hearty stews and the laughter of two boys who were starting to come into their own. One frosty morning, Hank found Clara tending to the animals in the barn. She was bundled in a thick coat, her cheeks rosy from the chill. "I got something to ask you," he said, awkwardly, removing his hat. "I've been thinking on it for a while now." Clara's heart picked up a beat. She paused in her work, meeting his eyes. "Yes." Hank shifted, obviously nervous. "I know you loved Thomas, and I'll never try to replace him. But I can't deny my feelings for you. You and your boys have become like a family to me. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay by your side. Not just as a ranch hand, but as a partner in all ways." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She set aside the milk bucket and stepped closer, pressing her hand to Hank's cheek. The storm of emotions inside her was intense. Gratitude, sorrow, hope. But above all, a deep, abiding affection for this steadfast man who had risked everything to help her. "Yes, Hank, yes," she whispered. The gentle shared smile between them was the dawn of a new chapter in both their lives. News spread quickly in Dodge City that Clara Bennett had found a new partner on the ranch. Some gossips whispered about the scandal of a widow marrying so soon after her husband's passing. But the majority of townsfolk who had watched her struggle bravely rejoiced at her newfound happiness. With Hank officially part of the family, the ranch's future looked brighter than ever. James and William took to calling him Pa Hank in time, though it wasn't an overnight transition. The boys still mourned their father, but they grew to admire Hank for his unwavering support. The ranch expanded slowly, investing in 2 more horses and securing a contract with the local hotel to supply fresh eggs and milk. Clara, her hair pulled back, with the same determination that once saw her through the worst days, managed the books, and oversaw daily chores, proving herself a capable ranch owner in her own right. Hank, humble, yet proud to stand by her, tackled every chore from dawn till dusk. Occasionally, Clara would find herself gazing at the horizon, where the sun dipped below the rolling plains, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. She thought of Thomas, and a bittersweet smile would play on her lips. She loved him still, but life continued forward, and she carried his memory in her heart, forging a future he would have wanted for her and the children. Midway through the following spring, with the ranch on firmer ground, Clara and Hank decided to make a trip into Dodge City to finalize some paperwork regarding the ranch's ownership. It had become clear that the land deed should reflect the new partnership. On the way they passed the jailhouse where Everett had once been locked up. He'd been transferred to the state prison, so the cell was empty now, a reminder of the storm that had passed from their lives. Walking into the offices of the county recorder, Clara felt a surge of pride as she signed her name, reaffirming her rightful claim. Hank added his name as a trustee, a practical measure to ensure the ranch would remain stable if anything happened to either of them. The clerk, a kindly older man, offered his congratulations. "You've done quite a thing here," he said, flipping through the paperwork. "Not many folks come back from the brink like you have." Clara only smiled, recalling the many nights she'd lain awake doubting herself. The anxiety, the heartbreak, the betrayal, all had shaped her into who she was now. And she was stronger for it. Years later, folks around Dodge City still told stories about how Clara Bennett and her 2 boys were thrown out by their own kin, only to find refuge with a humble cowboy named Hank Dawson. They spoke of the sabotage, the fire, and the triumphant day. Everett Bennett was put behind bars. Children gathered at the local mercantile, wide-eyed, listening to the heroic tale of how the widow refused to sign over her legacy, how she braved storms and bullets to protect her family. For Clara and Hank, life was not without its daily challenges. Cattle diseases, droughts, the occasional run-in with shady characters. But they faced it all with a unity forged in adversity. The ranch thrived little by little, each season surpassing the last in yield. James grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibilities. Each passing year, William followed suit, full of curiosity and a knack for horses that rivaled Hank's. And every time they rode into Dodge City, Clara walked with her head held high, no longer the trembling widow who felt the world was against her. She wore the dust and sweat of ranch life with pride, a testament to perseverance and love. As for Everett, he served his prison term only to emerge into a world that had moved on without him. Rumors said he wandered west, trying to rebuild a life somewhere else. But with no family or fortune, success seemed unlikely. Mildred vanished from social circles, reduced to renting a single room in the outskirts of another town. Some folks pitied her. Others said it was merely the result of standing by as cruelty was done. Karma had indeed played its hand. Life, in its merciless yet strangely just manner, had taken from those who sought to destroy others, and it had rewarded those who banded together in kindness, resilience, and love. In the wide, unforgiving prairies of the Wild West, no lesson was ever taught without a price. But for Clara, Hank, and the boys, the price was worth paying to secure a future that shone brighter than any gold coin ever could. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey into the Wild West, where loyalty and kindness overcame cruelty and courage rose from the ashes of heartbreak. From the moment the heartless in-laws cast out poor Clara Bennett and her 2 boys, fate tested their spirits on the dusty frontier. Yet through grit, hope, and a cowboy's generous heart, they persevered. Justice found its mark, rewarding those who stood for honor and punishing those who reveled in deceit. Now, partner, if this story moved you, if you felt the heat of the barn fire and the sting of betrayal as keenly as Clara did, then do us one favor. Like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and kicking in the saddle. Until next time, ride tall. Keep your word true and never forget. There's always hope on the horizon.